Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most gracious thing since my son. I mean, how much more could you possibly master the entire backstory to Star Wars? And while my son eventually graduated high school and became an astronaut, the fortunate reality of the Star Wars prequels is that they'll be around forever.
So, we've moved on to the prequels. I've been looking forward to this. As you've probably gathered from watching the previous reviews, the prequels are awesome. The hate came from mostly entitled butthurt YouTubers like Red Letter Media, who decided to drive Lucas into the ground. This isn't to say every prequel hater was malicious, but most of the hate was, with people telling the original creator that he's wrong about his own franchise or dictating him on what they think Star Wars should be. Saying things like how Lucas never had any actual talent and that it was other people who made Star Wars great, and the reason the prequels supposedly failed was because he had such creative control. Prequel hate is ridiculous, with insane stretches like how Watto and the Neimoidians, among other characters, were racial stereotypes. I'm going to address these complaints when the review starts, but first, I'll be going through the movie. So here is The Phantom Menace. A prequel is a genius idea for this franchise. Since a lot of the plot in the original trilogy referenced the past, it would be an obvious place to go. Not only would it expand the universe in a unique way, but it would also be a great way to introduce new fans to Star Wars. It's kind of like how you could play the Red Dead games in any order, one being a self-contained story, and the other being a sequel, and the other a prequel. People say prequels don't work because the destination is set, and there is a lack of tension because of that. I say prequels can be effective at expanding the universe. The enjoyment I got out of the 2011 Thing prequel is seeing them connect the dots. It's oh so easy to make continuity errors. Pixar was actually conflicted with this when making Monsters University because there was continuity versus telling their original story. Prequels serve the purpose of seeing how it happened rather than what happened. Mystery is still there, especially stories where retrospective sequels give vague information on past events. The mystery isn't what comes next, it's what came before. So yes, the existence of the prequels is justified. It seems like a nitpick people like to bring up. It's confusing beyond belief that critics of these movies bring up a common issue in prequel filmmaking. They seem to complain about really stupid things, like certain plot points and concepts. So critics seem to think that the interplanetary trade blockade is a confusing concept for kids. It's not. I first watched this movie when I was 9 and understood everything just fine. Cutting off resources is not a complicated situation. The thing is, the film goes for the Pixar approach of telling an in-depth, intelligent story. This is praiseworthy because it defies a common trope filmmakers use of talking down to the audience. I usually didn't like how shows did this as I got older. Plus, everything in the story has a purpose. The politics serve the purpose of world building, which is something this film does better than all the others. The idiots who recommend you skip this movie obviously didn't pay attention to the fact that The Phantom Menace is essential. It is indeed very important. Don't let those chumps tell you otherwise. So on to the plot itself. The crawl isn't jaw-dropping excitement, but it establishes the universe. 2 Jedi Knights are on a mission by the Republic to settle a trade dispute between Naboo and a greedy corporation called the Trade Federation. Critics say that the film has a lack of energy throughout. No, it doesn't. There are many ways to tell a good story. There's plenty of action and build-up to it. The film starting off slow by default isn't a bad thing. Red Dead Redemption 2 is painfully slow and excels at what it does. There's plenty of build-up to action, and the action scenes themselves are more scaled back, but at least to me, the movie feels more calm and controlled rather than letting loose on everything. The Phantom Menace introduces us to our protagonist Qui-Gon Jinn, and our secondary main character, the younger Obi-Wan Kenobi. We get a lot of returning characters too. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan survive being gassed as they make their way out of the hallways, and they make their way to the Trade Federation hangar and sneak onto droid army troop transports. It's here where we come across a new character when we land on Naboo. Jar Jar Binks is an alien buffoon. He is saved by Qui-Gon, who swears a life debt to him. Let's take some time to talk about him. Jar Jar Binks never annoyed me, but he kind of left me unamused. He's not that funny. I only recall 1 or 2 times where he actually got a laugh out of me, and it was more of a chuckle. Some of the jokes around him come across as a bit juvenile, but on the upside, some of the jokes are established for world building. Jar Jar leads the pair to the underwater Gungan city, where Qui-Gon negotiates with Boss Nass to grant them a vehicle to get to Theed, the human Naboo capital. When they arrive, they go stealth and rescue the Queen of Naboo, Queen Padme Amidala, to where they escape the planet. Later in the movie, you can tell that she's going to be Luke and Leia's mother, based on how she and you-know-who interact. After a tense escape sequence, the royal ship is saved by one lone droid, R2-D2. Their ship is damaged and they need to stop at a local system. This is where we return to Tatooine, but they managed to give us something new on an old location. Commendable. It's here that we meet Anakin Skywalker, a sweet, naive kid stuck in slavery. Qui-Gon tries to bargain for ship parts from Watto the junk dealer, but fails. It's here where we get an interesting turn. Qui-Gon discovers through a blood test that Anakin is naturally gifted through the Force, having the highest count of midichlorians ever recorded. People say they hated the midichlorians because it demystifies the Force. Nope, it grounds the Force and explains why not everyone can be a Jedi. It doesn't break law too. George had this plan since the very beginning. The reason you didn't see midichlorians in the originals was because they weren't directly plot relevant. Midichlorians aren't the Force. They're a means of measuring the Force in someone. Then we get the best part. Qui-Gon and Watto make a bet. If Qui-Gon wins, Anakin goes free and Watto gives him ship parts. If Watto wins, they get the Queen's ship. The competition will be a pod race. They hype up the pod race through mentions of it and seeing Anakin test his pod racer. Anakin essentially has to step up his A game. His freedom is at stake. We get pod racing. This is a cool sport that adds something new to Star Wars. Sports was never really quite covered at all in the originals, so to see a sport in a Star Wars movie that is plot relevant, it's fresh. It's also quite tense. They've established before that pod racing is fast and dangerous, with the minor antagonists of Bulba sabotaging and cheating. It may be a cliche, but it's executed well. Anakin ends up winning and gets to go to Coruscant to be a Jedi, but then bam! A new enemy, a hooded figure with a lightsaber attacks Qui-Gon. I like Maul's introduction here. People say that Maul has little dialogue, but the reason he's cool is that we're shown a lot about him. He's the type of character that doesn't need dialogue. Let me give an external example. Soundwave in Transformers Prime only says like 4 words throughout the entire show, but he's one of the best characters in the show. Why? It's because we're shown a lot about him and he still has an impact. I think Maul is the same type of character. Despite having limited screen time, he does more than Boba Fett. So point is, Qui-Gon escapes and we get to Coruscant, the Republic's capital. It's nice to see that George Lucas adhered to heir to the Empire when naming the Republic capital. I like Coruscant better than the original name he had planned. You see, this is a big misconception. George Lucas may have had more control, but that doesn't mean he didn't collaborate with his staff to refine his work. So that's another invalid criticism. We also get some more world building. The Republic is a mess. Where people criticize this shit for being political and other nonsense, I see it as a positive. It makes the universe believable because guess what? This shit happens in real life, but they still manage to make it an interesting scenario. Palpatine comes back from Return of the Jedi for this prequel. He is a younger Palpatine. He manipulates the Queen to fuck the current Chancellor Valorum over. As such, Valorum loses his position and Palpatine becomes a new Chancellor. Despite this, they still need to deal with this blockade on their own. Qui-Gon brings Anakin to the Jedi Council, but he is rejected because, as Mace Windu points out,
he's too old.
The Queen's ship returns to Naboo, and they find and convince the Gungans to lessen the Trade Federation's grip on the planet. This is where the climax happened. We cut to 4 battles at once, which should certainly quiet the critics who said the film was boring. And all 4 have an important role in the story. While Anakin and Jar Jar's roles aren't written particularly well, hell, I would say even poorly, I guess you could say about Anakin at least is that he had assistance from R2-D2, who was established to be really useful. The other two battles are great though, especially the duel between Maul, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And despite it being a prequel, and suspecting it for the entire movie, when Maul gets a finishing blow on Qui-Gon, along with Obi-Wan, those who pay attention feel it. Qui-Gon is the most interesting character in this movie. We spend the entire movie with him, and the moment he meets his end, it's heartbreaking. And now for the rest of the trilogy, Obi-Wan now carries the torch. We know what is at stake now. Obi-Wan has to approach the fight carefully. If he doesn't, he will die and Anakin will never become a Jedi, and the Sith assassin will get away too. We see an intense battle between Obi-Wan and Maul, and Obi-Wan almost loses, if not for using Qui-Gon's lightsaber to cut Maul in half, never to be seen again until Dave Filoni thought he needed more screen time. Afterwards, he goes to Qui-Gon Jinn, and essentially Qui-Gon gives him his final wish, to train Anakin, as Qui-Gon believes he is the Jedi in the prophecy in which a chosen one will destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. The final scene set up the rest of the saga quite well. Obi-Wan convinces Jedi Grand Master Yoda to train Anakin. A funeral is held for Qui-Gon, to where everything else is set up, and a final celebration mirroring A New Hope to cap off the movie. And then the movie ends. Okay, so this isn't a perfect story, but what this story does well, it does so well that it's almost like a smokescreen to the film's issues. But I shouldn't ignore it. Let's talk about the issues. First, there's certain contrivances such as Jar Jar at the final battle and the Chosen One prophecy. George Lucas could have done more revisions of his work, but for what was given, it's impressive. Maybe have one of Jar Jar's troops take over as leader when he realizes that Jar Jar is an idiot, or elaborate on the Chosen One prophecy's origins. Stuff like this would have assisted the storytelling. I was conflicted between a 7 and an 8 with this segment, but after some thinking, I decided that I should probably put it in between the two. I'm going to give 7.5 points to the story. Better than it ever has been before. George Lucas pushed for innovation in film technology, and this film is miles ahead of everything else for its time. Clearer shots and better shot scenes. The duel between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon and Maul is my favourite. Not only is the choreography 50 steps ahead the clunky crap Return of the Jedi had, it's also visually appealing. It's so engaging to watch. Plus, when there's no John Williams music, we observe the choreography closely. The pod racing is also pretty cool. I never took an interest in sports movies, so for the pod racing to fly in and blow us away with pure spectacle is cool. Star Wars is as much about the spectacle as much as anything else. The pod racing feels so fast that we get the sense that the races could crash easily. It's also such great video game material. My favourite shot in the movie would have to be Qui-Gon's funeral. Seeing our protagonist be cremated is so damn sad, and the shot giving us one last look at him packs 1,000 emotional punches. As for the editing, I do think the film could have had better pacing, despite the excellent story. The film is slow throughout up until the climax. I wouldn't say that there's a lack of energy, because there is a lot for the people who actually pay attention. There's plenty of action throughout the film, at the start, at the middle, and the end. And yes, I know what the start, the middle, and the end is, despite the problems with the pacing. There's once again a lot of visual storytelling, perhaps more than the original trilogy, where you get to observe the world purely visually. In fact, it's even better than Return of the Jedi. There's many great pause frames. If you put an oil painting filter over these pictures, they'd all be fucking masterpieces. Better than Picasso, am I right? I'm going to give 9 points to the cinematography/editing. Contrary to the internet's narrative, The Phantom Menace had more practical effects than the entire original trilogy combined. But this movie also treads new ground with CGI innovations. I think the CGI in The Phantom Menace works for different reasons. You see, in the original trilogy, everything looks like reality. In The Phantom Menace, everything looks like it exceeds reality. The effects blow us away. Now I am totally convinced that this is a galaxy far, far away. The technical achievement for Jar Jar Binks is impressive, especially in 1999, where the 21st century hasn't even started yet. Everything is refined and great to look at. The visual design also assists this. The prequels had to make costumes look a little bit more old-fashioned because The Phantom Menace takes place around 32 years before A New Hope, and there's clear differences between clothing in the 80s and clothing in the 2010s. They managed to make the costume design look old-fashioned compared to the original trilogy, but still there so you can see the resemblance. The worn-out costume Obi-Wan in A New Hope is expanded upon. These are the Jedi robes, attire for the Order. The Naboo attire looks stylish and upper class. Tatooine attire looks ragged and poverty-stricken, and these costumes also assist the settings, so it's great costumes. The new aliens are also pretty good. The designs tell you a lot about the general personality of the aliens. The Gungans have this beautiful underwater settings, and the Gungans themselves look like sentient underwater aliens without being a rip-off of the Mon Calamari. The Toydarians, or more specifically Watto, looks like a dirty, sleazy, lazy fat ass with a sketchy voice. The Neimoidians are an expansion of the Duros, as they are classified as near Duros, making the universe feel connected. These are all aliens in outer space. They can be given whatever accent George wants them to have. You think George Takei would have voiced a Neimoidian in the Clone Wars if George was racist? Anyways, the sets and locations are really creative. As mentioned before, this movie had more practical effects than the original trilogy, but despite that, it still tries to push digital filmmaking technology. There's such a thing as good CGI, but this is something the Transformers movies do best, even if the story is shit. The Naboo Palace is practical, the slave quarters are practical, and the shit that isn't practical still managed to look great in their own way because they were made without limits of practicality. I'm going to give 10 points to the effects, visual design, and sets. Northern Irish actor Liam Neeson plays Qui-Gon Jinn, the main character. Just wanted to emphasize that. Liam plays one of the most interesting characters in the saga. George Lucas originally envisioned an American to play Qui-Gon, but Liam Neeson got the role, and for good reason. Qui-Gon does an excellent job playing a Jedi. Liam Neeson is usually associated with getting all the ladies, but Qui-Gon is of course a celibate Jedi, showing that he does have a wider range. Liam Neeson plays a calm, occasionally mischievous Jedi who approaches the universe through moral greys with ease. Scottish actor Ewan McGregor replaces Sir Alec Guinness as the younger Obi-Wan Kenobi. Recasting a legend would not have been easy, but Ewan McGregor is an even better fit for Obi-Wan. Not only does McGregor play a wise younger Obi-Wan with some excellently delivered lines, but when he transitions to the main character role during Duel of the Fates, the expression he makes is simply fantastic. McGregor actually cared about Star Wars unlike Guinness, so you can tell this time the actor is actually having fun. Natalie Portman plays Queen Padme Amidala. Portman perhaps has an important role in the whole saga. Portman wasn't as good as the other actors in this movie, but I still think Portman gets the job done. She does convincingly play a supporting person to Anakin before the pod race, and when she tries to convince the Gungans to help overthrow the Trade Federation, but definitely some room for improvement. Jake Lloyd plays the young Anakin Skywalker. Child actors are usually terrible. Daniel Radcliffe is supposed to be a great actor, right? Well, that doesn't change the fact that he had a shit performance in the first Harry Potter movie. So this was going to be a challenge for Lucas. I'd say Jake was okay, I guess. He's not as hyperactive as you think he'd be during a fucking space battle, but he does a fine job portraying a hopeful slave boy from a desert planet. Ahmed Best plays Jar Jar Binks. Remember how people said that Jar Jar was a racist caricature of black Jamaicans or some shit like that? Well, most of Jar Jar's movements and mannerisms started with the casting of Ahmed Best. This also debunks the misconception that George never collaborated with anyone on his own work. Ahmed Best was essentially a co-writer to Jar Jar Binks. So point is, Ahmed Best tries his best to be energetic and hilarious, but he's just not that funny. On the upside, he's very quotable with his lines. Ian McDiarmid returns as Palpatine, not as an emperor, but as a politician turned chancellor. Despite the fact you can easily tell he's the emperor, McDiarmid still plays a threatening force in his robes and a kind politician in the political scenes. He switches between the two excellently. He's not in this movie much, so his screen presence is a little scaled back, but that's fine. Ray Park, the body actor, and Peter Safranowitz, the voice actor, probably butchered that surname, play Darth Maul. Despite having limited screen time in the film itself, Maul is a memorable character because he's intimidating. Both actors don't do much, but despite that, they do so much with the role. Maul's voice is intimidating, and Maul looks intimidating. Ray Park did the choreography very well. He comes across as a well-trained Sith assassin. It's also the design that gets the job done, but the actors do their best. I'm going to give 7 points to the acting. Duel of the Fates. I'm going to give 10 points to the music/sound. Okay. I should probably explain why the music and sound is a 10. The music is fucking awesome. John Williams ensures the music is grandiose and epic, which certainly elevates the intensity. Other soundtracks, such as when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are approaching the underwater city, is atmospherically calm. It's immersive shit, and it gives an otherwise unimportant scene some character. My favourite track is, of course, Duel of the Fates. It's a catchy tune that leaves you wanting the song to continue, and it's one of the best soundtracks in the series. For a prequel, where the destination is already set, it feels like the battle to end all battles, even though it's like the second one chronologically in the saga. It's also great to listen to on its own, which is what I usually prefer with film music. As for the sound effects, it's superb. The sound effects introduced, such as the Boombas and the pod races, are excellent. They feel like they all belong. Although I would say I like the sound effects in the original trilogy the most out of all three trilogies. The returning sounds, such as blasters and lightsabers, sound better than they ever have been before, and they are put in excellently with the scenes. Prequel music is the best, especially in Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, but that's a discussion for later. I've already mentioned I'm giving 10 points to the music/sound, and it's staying that way. To conclude, The Phantom Menace is a large step to expanding unanswered questions in the Star Wars saga. Once again, it was more about how it happens rather than what happens. The enjoyment you're meant to get out of prequels is seeing them connect the dots. And since this was not just one standalone prequel, but rather the first of three, it still has a reason to make you anticipate the sequel. Prequels can be just as good as a sequel. It all comes down to execution. The Phantom Menace has earned a total of 43.5 points out of 50, equaling an 8.7 out of 10. It scored higher than I thought it would. It managed to be a step below Return of the Jedi though. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Water was running,